Hi, I'm Scott,
Hello, and I'm Dan.
and welcome to the bookcase. Today's books are Tell Your Children by Alex Berenson, a former New York Times reporter.
And Drug Use for Grown-Ups, written by Carl Hart, who's a neuroscience and psychology professor at Columbia University.
Dan and I have talked, and we think these books, of course, have relevance for mental health professionals, but we also think that this has broad appeal.
Yeah, there really isn't anybody who doesn't have an opinion about drug use and addiction, and probably very few people whose lives, in some way, maybe remotely, aren't affected by drug use.
That's true, Dan. And I can remember when you first mentioned this particular book to me. What's its basic premise?
Well, the basic premise is our approach to drug use in the United States, the regulatory environment, the the opinions of the experts. We got it all wrong. That our drug use policy is a mess, and quite frankly, the drugs themselves aren't as dangerous as we are led to believe.
Really? You mean like meth, heroin?
Well, personally, I do think there are some issues with the book and some of the claims. At the same time, this accomplished professor is admits to regular use of heroin and things like methamphetamine.
Wow.
And his claims, and it's backed up with pretty good evidence, are that the drugs themselves are not as dangerous as we think they are. He's not denying that such a thing as addiction doesn't happen, but he believes that the overwhelming majority of drug use in the United States, and really across the world, is responsible and reasonable, and basically just people exercising their rights to pursue happiness. He talks about his own drug use in light. He believes that he's quite honestly a better person, a better father, a better husband, a better researcher for his use of drugs, which happens in a very, in general, very controlled, ideal setting.
And this must be pretty disruptive given what you've done for a living.
I can't say that I've read a book, and as you know, I read a lot of books, but I can't say that this book hasn't been one of the more disruptive books to my thinking than any other book I've read in a long time. And I mean, at the same time, I wish that I had written this book, because I have had similar thoughts along the way. I didn't put them together the way he did, and just putting out a plug for the book. It's fantastically written. I mean, he weaves stories from his own life in with hard statistics from research studies, and so he's a very good storyteller.
It's such an interesting contrast to Alex Berenson's book, who's a former New York Times reporter and was very active at the start of the COVID pandemic, publishing articles questioning the direction that the federal government and state governments were taking. And it's also, I think, a fantastically well-written book, putting the legalization of marijuana in a historical context. And his argument is this, that as we rush from state to state, now legalizing marijuana, not just for medicinal use, which he would put in quotes and question the research about that, but as we rush towards legalization, he would say that there is simultaneously a lack of interest in discussing the potential negative consequences of regular and routine marijuana use, and in particular noting that the pot being used today is between 10 and 20 times more potent than the pot that was used during the 70s.
I read it after this book, and so I was a little taken aback in that book by there's some fear tactics that that are used. It can't help but influence the reader when the first story that's told is, I think, this woman in Australia or New Zealand who murders her family. It reminds me of the stories that Dr. Hart talks about, the cocaine crazed Negro or the pot crazed Negro stories, that the original, this guy, this Harry Anslinger, the drug czar of the I think it was in the 30s when the basically marijuana became banned because of the fear tactics that were used. And the other thing that I worry about with the book is, you know, the idea of correlation and causation. You know, because psychosis and marijuana are there are some correlation. There's just no question about that. And Berenson does address this in the book, the idea that people who are prone to psychosis might preferentially use marijuana.
And it seems, I'm old enough, I'm pretty sure you are as well, to remember the dragnet drug episodes on television, and drugs were always presented in a negative light. Certainly when I was in grade school, we were told the story of Art Linkletter's daughter. I don't know if you recall, but if I'm remembering the story correctly, she had used acid and either walked out a window. In any event, the drug was said to have caused this. And then you've also highlighted another important piece, the racial disparities in terms of how this was handled over the last 5-6 generations of people. It's clearly an issue. And yet, I'm driving this weekend out of the city of Chicago, and there are advertising billboards for dispensaries in the city. You cannot advertise cigarettes, but you can advertise the pot store, which is right off the expressway.
Well, and I think that that's one of the points in this book, is that there are so many, and you know, maybe this is, you know, part of it. There's so many drug users out there who basically are in the closet now. Now it's cool to be using cannabis, and it's getting increasingly cool to be using hallucinogenics.
Yes.
Which, and I can't say that I have reviewed this literature real closely, but probably have some mental health utility. But that's one of the points that he makes, is that the difference between, say, something like MDMA and methamphetamine is not that great. And MDMA, you know, is in essence can be a psychedelic,
right?
And so there are these drugs that are cool, but of course, if you have drugs that are cool, you have to have drugs that are uncool,
right?
Like heroin and cocaine
and cigarettes. Cigarettes are no longer cool. I just read a stat this morning as I was getting ready for our chat that indicated that 168 million Americans say that they've used a substance, whether illicit or licit substance, in the last week. So if you include tobacco and substance use, you know, and you remove children, that's a huge percentage of adults that are doing this. But as you say, most of that is not spoken about. If you add pharmaceutically prescribed drugs, mental health drugs, antidepressants, etc., boy, I think we're getting close to the entire population.
And the idea that we are going to eradicate drugs,
right? That's clearly not going to happen.
It's not going to happen.
People want to alter their consciousness.
Yeah, and I think they want to, and the fact is that drugs work. They produce tremendous benefits for a lot of people. we're so focused on the problems that drugs cause, we lose sight of the fact, I mean, even in people who become addicted, and that's a whole topic unto itself, how addiction happens. But I mean, people start using drugs because they work, they improve mood, they induce euphoria, they are a social lubricant, they cause, Carl Hart would say they cause empathy. But I guess I was going to tell a little story about some groups that I facilitate. I try to bring a topic, and I introduced the topic of happiness and what makes you happy, and people went around the circle, and people would talk about their families and their kids and their grandkids, and one girl said, well, you're not going to be happy with this, but drugs make me happy. And I'm like, can we talk about that? It's
Right.
And I've been in the treatment field for over 30 years, and it's not something that we even talk about. It's like you can't even mention it.
Well, I know. I know, and sort of the history of the recovery movement and not share the edict not to share war stories. I can remember walking with a friend who ran a drug abuse clinic, and we had walked through, he's given me a tour, and at the end I said to him, hey, would you like to go have a beer, get something to eat? And he goes, shh. And I literally, I said, what? And I didn't know, somebody sleeping. He says, don't say beer in here. I was like, well, hey, I think these people know about that. I mean, after reading these two books, it seems clear that we're probably not going to resolve this whole issue about drug use. But if drugs are part of your life, and it seems like they are for the vast majority of people, then you should, I think, and Alex Berenson would agree with this, go into it with your eyes open.
And I'd like to say, I mean, I love both of these books. I think I love the drug use book more. I worry that it's, and I don't know if I've had my head in the sand. I don't have a good historical perspective. I don't think the world is ready for some of the concepts here. I mean, I see change as incremental. And so if this book can get people thinking in a particular way, I mean, one of the things we didn't mention is that I spend my time in the addiction treatment field, and so I see people who are just so horribly damaged by the stigma associated with drugs and the people that use them, which I think is very bad for
certain drugs, right? Certain drugs. Isn't this the issue? I mean, because the point in both books, and the point of all the available evidence, is that drug use is widespread. It's virtually everyone. It's just some drugs are more acceptable than others.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with that. And
I would say, the reason for me to read this book, because I think this book may be read and appreciated by all the wrong people. The people who already believe any drug use is bad, even though it's okay that the drug they're taking is prescribed by a physician, right? Well, OxyContin proves that it's not so simple, and all the other drugs that have been prescribed over the years.
And the fact that heroin is this close to morphine, and meth is this close to Adderall, right? That their differences are in essence negligible, and yet just the word heroin conjures up these images.
So these are the two books: Tell Your Children by Alex Berenson,
Drug Use for Grown-Ups by Carl Hart.
And you can find links to them in the section below on this video. We have 2 more books coming. Stay tuned for more of the bookcase. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Scott.